Hello! Today, for our final video on our dry stack stone wall, we're going to look at painting that new wall. You know, we've got that new wall in there. Now we need to match it to the other stone. We'll also add some windblown dirt. I'll show you how to show, where it accumulates and little areas where it maybe, it doesn't seem like it will, but it should. And then find little accents so that you can add a little personal touch to it. So we're going to dive right in, and this is me talking to you. Ready? This is this is the additional wall that we added on. It's glued in there and then contoured so that the pattern of these rocks here on the corner follow around and continue on this side. It's kind of hard to show it because it's so close to the camera, but that's what we're doing. So the first step after painting it is to go ahead and dry brush. So the first thing I'm going to use is some Desert Yellow 70977 from Vallejo. It's great stuff. And with this, I'm gonna get my paintbrush loaded up, and then I'm gonna go across it real light. And when I'm doing this the first time, it kind of tells me how it's going to go. So I always start off a little bit light, and then I can get a little heavier because I want to kind of feel how the surface is picking up the paint. I want to go in multiple directions because even though I'm dry brushing, I can still get streaking. So I want to make sure that I get enough on there to give me the detail I want, but I don't leave any patterns with it. It's supposed to be, this is just a base coat, so I'm not trying to leave any kind of streaks or anything like that. And that means when I load my brush up, I gotta kind of go light, see how much paint I got on there, and then I can kind of get heavier. Now, one of the reasons we added this was not only to see it come around the corner, but also to see the process of carving and painting and incorporating the tops. So the top of the wall and then the side of the wall. That's a big part of it. So we need to get some paint on there. Same process. I kind of, every time I load up my paintbrush, I gotta go really light. That first hit to the surface will tell you if you went too heavy or too light with your paint, and you can adjust so you don't destroy it. And we'll do the back side here as well. Okay, that looks pretty good. The last of my paint here. Now, before I go with my next, you could just go right to your next color. I want this to really set up. I want this to be a separate color. So I want it to dry, and I want to be sure it's dry. So I'm going to put this in my drying cabinet because the next dry brush is going to be with white. And it may not be quite as heavy as this, but the combination is what I really find nice. Is having them both together on here. Okay, back into the drying cabinet. Okay, I think we are ready. That was only a few minutes in there, but it's nice and dry. We don't want any paint to come off, and we want the paint to kind of separate, I guess, if you will. Let's see if we can get a nice tight shot there. So, we want that paint to stay separate from the other colors. So when I'm dry brushing, what's really, what I'm truly trying to accomplish is contrast. I'm trying to increase the high points with the low points, their visibility, by leaving the low points dark, the high points light, and it creates contrast. And so that's what you're doing when you're dry brushing. So now I'm just going to add some more color to that contrast with white. Don't worry about it getting a little bit light in color, because as we start adding other elements, other colors and things to everything, what'll happen is that bright white that I'm putting on here is going to get dulled. So just like the desert yellow, the first time I hit this thing, I'm going pretty light with my brush to see how much paint's on there. And I don't need a lot. This is just white. It's not an off-white, it's not a dull, it's not a gray. Full white. And that helps us get just a little different definition in that contrast that we're applying. The reason it needs to be dry is it doesn't need to do two things. Number one, if you had some moisture, it would possibly reactivate the paint that you're working with, and then they blend. And you don't want it to blend. You know, you want these separate colors to be highlights. So blending is the last thing we want. So you don't want too much water. Well, I don't have any water. I'm just doing the straight paint, no dilution whatsoever. And that allows me to get a thick paint. It'll leave its mark, but it's also not going to mix or blend because it doesn't have enough moisture in it to do it. And that's why we get so much nice detail from dry brushing. You're just hitting the tops of the peaks. I like to say it's like a mountain range. The valleys are green, and then the tops of the peaks have snow on them. So if you imagine this surface, you know, you're like at 86,000 feet, like where the SR-71 is cruising. You know, this is, you're looking down on this pleat, and that's like Pennsylvania, and you know, you can see the tops of the Appalachians there. That's the white. Those are the snow on top of the peaks, and then the darker areas there are the valleys. So that it's maybe a dumb analogy, but hopefully you can see what I'm saying. And you want that contrast. You want to create differences between the highs and the lows. That's exactly what dry brushing does. Dry brushing isn't the final thing I do. It's just part of the arsenal of painting. You know, I was listening to a podcast a while back, and they asked, you know, is dry brushing kind of I don't know, banal or just beyond, you know, nobody does that anymore because there's all these other things. And it's like, well, it's just a technique. It's not like dry brushing, well, maybe it was, but I didn't ever think of it as like a final thing you do and then you walk away. It's just part of what you do in painting. It's like a brush stroke. Okay, so I think there's enough on there. And you see, it's not just white. It's not just desert yellow. There's some variation in color, not a lot. Doesn't have to be. We're going to be starting to put variations in there. But the next step is to do some speckling or spackling, whatever you want to call it. It's using a much more watered down, same colors but watered down, and we use it with a toothpick, and we splatter. So I'm going to put this in the drying cabinet and get ready for that. So for this last thing, what I've been using is a very wide, somewhat of a stiff brush. And so that's what I've been using for this. And that's my dry brushing brush. When it started out, it looked something like that. Now I'm going to go to a longer bristle brush, something like this. And it's going to hold a lot more paint, but I just really want to be careful about the consistency of that paint. I want the paint to be approximately the same consistency as like milk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you here first, before we get the model out, a few things that we can do on this speckling, or I don't know what the right word is. Let me bring the paint over here so you can see it. Okay, so what I've done is I've just brought some water in, And you see that? See that? It's a wash. There's the base paint. It's very thick, okay? But I added some water here, and by adding some water over here, it's going to thin it out quite a bit. Now, when I first go to do this flicking thing, I don't want to load up a full thing. You just get massive splotches. So here's what I do. I will take, and I've always got just a paper towel here, and I'll take bleed a bunch of it off, you know, almost till it's almost dry. Now, I'm going to take it and where I place this, see, remember I said I've got these long bristles. Well, wherever I place this on here, that's going to determine how well it does. If I have it right here on the end, look what happens. See that little tiny flecks? There's not a lot. If I place it back here and do it, and they also shoot way out there. So that's one of the things you do. I keep this, the tooth pick, I keep that stable, and then I work with the brush. And I do it a lot. You know, I'm going in there quite a bit. I get a little bit more paint, dab it off, get the heavy stuff off, and here we go. Look at that. Now, this is construction paper, so the little tiny dots are actually just getting absorbed really quick. But these big dots, that's a big dot. If you're getting a bigger dot than that, your paint is too thick. You need to water it down, okay? I'm going to go ahead and show you what happens when I use too much and too thick of paint. Look at that. You may want that if you're doing like a star field or I don't know, you know what you're doing, but that's too big. That's too big of a dot. That's making too big. You can see it next to my finger. That's making too big of an expression, I guess, with the paint, the color on what you're doing. You know, you think about it in terms of scale. That might be as big as somebody's hand. So you got this big, you know, saucer blob on something that's probably not what you're wanting. You want these smaller ones. That's about as big, about half that size. You want something, you know, like that. So now we're going to move, and I think just for sake of viewing with the camera, I think it's better to do this. If I do this, you see what I'm saying? It's just kind of hard to see. But so I'm going to do this. Same paint. I'm going to my thinner paint. And I'm holding this, I don't know, 2 inches away. And it's going to shoot this way. If you got a bunch of stuff here, man, don't have your computer on the other side. You're going to be spraying your stuff on your computer. But here we go. Just little bits, see? Little bits. And now you can see it a lot better, I think, because if it's a little bit too much, I'm just going to grab those. You can kind of see how it's building up. And you'll get used to how much paint to grab. You know, trying different thicknesses might work in one situation. You might want to go with a different, and I keep saying thicknesses, I mean viscosities. You know, how thick or thin your paint is. But it's all about just, you know, test it on something. Really helps. Now we're gonna do both of the base colors, but I'm just gonna continue with the white. That's enough. I don't need too much. And then these big ones, see, there's some globs I even got on there. I'm just gonna get some water on here and just grab it and take it out. See? Takes it right out. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry. Let's go to the edge. A little bit more water, thin my paint out a little bit, get the excess off there. Go get some more water or get some more paint. Now the other thing is that because you're doing it this way, it's kind of flicking in that direction, you may want to change around a little bit. I don't think it's going to make a big difference unless it's very, very visible on your model. But you don't want to have patterns. You don't want to introduce something and then you can like see it, you know, as a separate pattern from what you're trying to do. Because what we're trying to do with this, ultimately, is we are trying to vary the surface. We're trying to make it not the same. We don't want it to be a pattern. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind. You're not looking to do too much or do enough that it makes a consistent pattern, because that would blow what we're kind of trying to do. And I'm not worried about getting it on the rest of the surface, because at this point, what I'm doing, and then there you can see how much we got on there. I got to do the top. Haven't done the top yet. But yeah, at this point, what I like to do is I'm going back over everything. I already had some variation between the first 3 walls that we did. I'll show you that in a second. I just need to get a little bit more of this. There we go. I already had a little difference between these first 3 walls. That was one piece, that was one piece, and that was one piece. And this is a little bit different than that. These are a little bit lighter, if you can tell, than that one. So we stopped at that point and then started working on this. But the next point is to kind of homogenize the entire thing. We don't want to look exactly the same. We just want to be able to make it look like it is contiguous. You know, we want this thing to look like it's, you know, one thing. The consistency throughout is really important. Okay, so I'm gonna let that dry. I'm gonna let those dots dry, and then we're gonna do some desert yellow. Okay, so now we're back, and now look, a lot of the white speckles with drying and stuff, you can't even hardly see them, but if you look close, you do see them, and that's exactly the effect we want. Here's a nice tight shot there. Can you see the speckling on there? A little bit, like these guys, but most of it has really faded in. But that's what you want. They're little pops of intense color. And so that's what we want. So now we're going to use more of the first color, desert yellow. And I get my excess off, and there we go. Whoops. Turn it like this, a little easier to hit it. Don't want too much on there, makes it gloppy. Don't want it too thick, that'll do it too. But you saw how much it dries out, and you know, when it's on something else, it does kind of dry lighter. The intensity when it's you know, before it dries is lessened quite a bit after drying. Okay, so let's get the top. And this is like the last step before we start doing the washes. So washes are coming up. And you know, whoops, see, look at that. I just went bonkers, but you just grab them. Just kind of wiped my brush off and then just went back and grabbed them. You know, there's for me at least, it's all about layering. I'm going to do these different areas, and I'm going to do these different paints and stuff as a series of paints. You know, as a series of passes, if you will. And each pass builds a new layer of color as well as you know, detail to the surface. So the more passes you do, the better. Can you overdo it? Sure. But I think you have to find your spot, you know. Doing it like me isn't what I'm teaching. I'm just teaching how. Where you stop, the colors you choose, that's all up to you. You know, that is where you take over and you say, look, for mine, I mean, you may use violet in here as an accent color, because somewhere in the terrain, this is from New Mexico, by the way, I got clarification. This picture that we're using as the basis for this, the inspiration for this, is from New Mexico. I had assumed it was in Texas. I think I said it earlier. Not earlier today, but in earlier videos. But yeah, it's in New Mexico. And so what if there is a certain kind of weed, a certain kind of plant that in New Mexico gives off something of a different color? Well, you want to use that. You want to use the local terrain. You want, because that's where all this age and all this weathering is coming from. So I had some big ones back here, so I just hit them. I just touch them, and they disperse a little bit. They fall away. Okay, we're gonna let that dry, and then we're gonna come back and start putting some color washes on here. Okay, so now we're gonna do some coloring. I think I'm going to start in here. And one of the things is the color on these is kind of consistent on the edges. So these bricks here, I want all these kind of this dark rust color. So we're going to start with those. Some of these down here. I'll do a little bit lighter color now. Yellows are amazing in this area. Okay, let's bring it all the way around. Don't worry if it gets a little bit dark. Deeper shades in some is just fine. And we are doing washes. So I'm not worried so much about, the wetness of it. As a matter of fact, I like to keep this surface wet while I'm doing this part. Because it blends better. This is sped up so you can see how I paint. You'll notice real quickly here that I jump around. I move to different areas that I'm painting. I'll go from the outside of the sidewall to the top to the inside. And what I'm doing here is I'm letting that paint dry. Because once it dries, I go back to it. And what happens there is the paint will go on, it's a little bit more vivid. But as it dries, it loses some of that. And so by jumping around like that, I'm giving it time to dry. I'm giving it time to change its color. And then I go back and add colors as I want them. Okay, I think that is ready to go back in the drying cabinet. Unfortunately, I lost the sound on this one. But basically what I'm doing is it's time for highlights and lowlights. I also had some pretty bad focus issues here, but anyway, so it just came out of the cabinet, so it's dry. I'm putting on the white. It's still a wash. It looks a little bit heavy, but that's because the surface is dry. So as soon as I get a little bit on here, I'll go back, I'll grab a little bit of water, and I'll start blending it in. So as I add these highlights, I'm not always just doing the top of the stone. You'll notice a lot of times I'll do the middle of the stone, and that's because I'm looking for the high area, not necessarily the top of the stone. So if you've got a stone that has the middle of it kind of pushes out, heck yeah, do the top of that. And then, of course, I'll come back in, I'll do the low lights, I'll let the highlights kind of dry a little bit like I did with the color, and then I'll come back in and do some more. So I switch from highlight to low light when I'm doing this entire thing. Here, I found that I like the yellow a lot more than I thought I would. So I need to go now to the initial walls that we created and bring some yellow like from around the corner that I just added there. So again, the last pass on this whole thing is kind of making sure that everything melds. So if I introduce a color late into a certain part, I kind of got to go back on the other part. Now, this is another interesting thing. I found that I wanted to outline my rocks a little bit more. So as I'm going in here, highlighting and lowlighting, I'm also grabbing some black in a few places and really putting in some heavy dark shadows in some of those gaps between the stones. It's just something I did. I didn't do it in other places because I didn't need it, but this sidewall did. So I'm doing paint to kind of change the terrain, or I guess the texture, more than physical changes, just because I'm already done with this side, but I needed more black, I needed more shadows, so I'm doing it with paint instead of going back and maybe using a texturing tool. First thing I did was I took a little bit of the sanded grout, and this is just like a little tiny cap from your milk jug or something. And then I put in a little bit of Mod Podge, and I'm making a pretty runny paste. I want it pretty runny. I don't want it thick, like toothpaste or anything like that. I want it pretty runny so I can put it on with a brush. So I can brush this on. So you see, you're seeing mostly Mod Podge in that. You're hardly seeing the stuff in it, and that's good. Because even though you're just seeing mostly glue, it's kind of the dust effect that we want anyway. I'm going with a little bit smaller brush. It's not a real big one. And I'm dipping in here, and I want you to see this. When I dip in there, it grabs a pretty good amount of it on the brush, and then I'm coming in and I'm dabbing it right here at the base. And what I'm trying to do is get a little bit of this stuff to collect right there. You know, dirt's going to collect around other things, and so that's what I'm keeping in mind. I am going to put some out here like I already did, but I'm really trying to get this dirt to collect in corners and in little crevices. So I'm just real slowly going in here. If I drip, it's not a big deal. I can go in with water and get rid of it. And see, I'm just adding that. If I want to place with a bunch, like underneath this is that cut, this is that little drip right there. I want a little bit more there. So I just come in here and I'm just dabbing that there. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm going to go in and just pick up just some of the dry stuff on my brush because it's wet, and just roll that in there, and then there it gets a bunch more. And I'm doing that specifically under this, like things have you know, accumulated there. Now that's in there, I maybe don't want all that Mod Podge. I just take a Q-tip, and this will suck up the water, but it's going to leave all the debris. So I just go in there and I just real carefully, and it'll just wick all that moisture away and leave your dirt. And see that nice little pile there? It just wicks it right away. Yeah. There you go. So now I've got a nice little pile of debris there. Looks pretty natural. If I want to streak more, then I'm going to use the same thing. Again, I've got this stuff, even though it looks pretty muddy and stuff like that, if I don't kind of go in there and scoop stuff up, if I just get the wet stuff, and I come up here, then I'm doing streaking. And that's just going to be this mud kind of streak. Now, it's not going to show up on this surface until after it dries, you know. But
gonna add that texture. Yes, I do.
yeah, it'll be nice and subtle. And then if we want, we can go back and paint it to bring more of it out. But what we're trying to do here is get these little accumulations and these little crevices and stuff. That is what I think is going to look real natural. So here I'm going to scoop up a little more and we'll dab in here. We definitely want to get some up in the rocks. You know, we don't want just this dirt and debris and stuff affecting the horizontal, the flat places. We want it to be in the rock. So when I'm doing this and trying to get it up in this rock, almost like a filler, I just come back with a little bit of water. And don't worry about that water, because remember, we can wick that water away. But almost like when you're doing tile, I'm washing away the stuff on the surface, but it's leaving that grout in the cracks. So it's not going to change the color of the surface or the texture we've already applied, but it'll give us this real nice fill in between the cracks.
That's a nice effect.
Yeah, and I think that's going to look great. If you find that you have too much in a place, just water is going to take this off. But you want to do it while it's still wet. Once this dries, you know, it's got Portland cement in it, you know, the sanded grout. So you can use just water with your sanded grout. But you know, when you grout tile, you need to seal it after it's been, you know, you put in your grout, and you put in your tile, and then you wipe it all off. Then you have to put a sealer on it because grout is still porous. And without the sealer, it'll start to break up. Well, it's the same kind of thing here. If I use it without the Mod Podge, I just have to, you know, understand that it's possible it could degrade, it could be knocked off. If I mix it with the Mod Podge, it'll set up the same way, but the Mod Podge will seal it. So that's why I do it with the Mod Podge and not just water. Okay? Alrighty. So I would just basically, you know, we go over the whole thing. Over here on the back side, we've got right here, we've got some real nice depressions in the top. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to come back to our camera. We've got some real nice depressions got carved into the top here, and I need to get some of that dirt in there. And it's just like we did, taking my brush, I'm kind of almost scooping with my brush and I'm putting it in there. But while this is wet, and this time I do want to get enough of that grit in there that there's some dirt in there. But while it's wet, that's when I'm going to come in with a little bit of this grass. So now how I use my grass is I had a static grass applicator that I made and then I broke it. But lately I have not been using that. I've just been doing this. So I just take a little bit out of there and I just roll it in my fingers. And we do not want a lot. This is just a little tiny bit of grass that grabbed a hold. I'm going to cut it off. So I've got it just like that. Don't worry about if it's too long because you can always trim it. But I'm going to take that little tiny tuft right there and I'll put it right in there. Okay. And then it's going to want to basically stand straight up, you know, straight vertical. What I like to do is take a toothpick or you know, one of my styluses or whatever, but a toothpick works great. And I want to work at the base to get all the base pieces together, and then I want to take the top and spread them out a little bit. I've done this in other videos where I do it more with like a bigger tuft, but we just don't want a big tuft on here. So it's harder to see maybe. but we're just spreading those out because, you know, when the grass comes up, it doesn't, everything does, I mean, a couple of them go like that, but then the base of them, they kind of go like that. And that's what I'm trying to create. The shorter ones, I want a little bit of this, and then just like one or two going straight up, you know, and that's going to be it for that. Don't worry if you get a little bit too much. It's real, you know, it's easy to work with and stuff like that. So you can come back and modify it later. I've got a little bit of that in there. Now I'm going to take some of this green, same kind of deal. And one of the things I like to do is I just take it out of the top and just like that, and then cut off from there. And then the green, I'm going to take some, they're kind of shorter. You know, the longer I want it to be the brown, but the shorter ones I want right at the base to show that it's actually growing. So I want to put those in the same place with it. And then they're kind of spread out. Once that dries, I can come back in and trim it. Okay?
Yes.
Another way to do it, same process.
You would trim it into the like your bush effect or whatever.
Yeah, well, not a bush effect so much, because remember, this is just straight grass. Yeah, so no rounding or not. It's just straight grass, so it's just straight up a few and then coming out like that. After it dries, a really nice effect is to take a little bit of debris and put on the end, and it looks like, you know, the top of your grass, the stalk, it'll have the little wheat.
Like wheat head.
Yeah, and you can make a little wheat head on the top of it. Looks fantastic and works really well. What did I want to grab? Oh, I am gonna show you a different way to do it now. It's where you just put the glue on the tuft, and the watered down Mod Podge that I use, this is Mod Podge and water 50-50. It's not enough to do what I want to do next. Here I'm using the really thick scenic glue. This is the thicker stuff. And so in that instance, all I'm doing is I'm taking the same deal, I'm cutting my little tuft, and I'm just going to dip it in that. And that's just the other way of doing it, because there's, you know, when I'm here, I'm doing it into something. But if I want to come out, if I want to come out of a crack or something, I don't have the dirt to make it stick like I did on this one. So I can just put a little tiny dab in there. And here, right on top, I got a tuft coming right out the top now. It's a little long, and again, I'll trim it. So, one of the things that I do for trimming is this. I gotta find it here. It is an old beard trimmer.
What?
A beard trimmer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
We got beards, I forgot.
yeah, so I've got my old beard trimmer here, and this. I'm sorry, it's giving us our things. We only got 10 minutes, but you know, we'll just restart. So yeah, I take this old beard trimmer, and then I can go in here, and I can just real easily, and it does. Whoops. It does such an amazing job, because if I try to go into those very, very little guys and try to snip them, it doesn't work very well. They move, but this thing, they don't move a lick, and you can get in there and just tick, 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 everywhere you want to get, and it works great. And I think, you know, if you don't have one you want to use, I mean, they're like $10 maybe. You know, they're pretty darn inexpensive. Yeah, and this is the old one I don't use anymore, so yeah, it works great. So that's a great way to trim all this grass.
That's pretty slick.
You can, I mean, I've even done like a whole thing and mowed it. You know, you can kind of mow it with this thing, and it works brilliant. Okay, so now I want to get, I got a little mess here. Hold on. I want to get some sticks in there. So the sticks are roots, and I'm going to do this a little different because I want to coat the root kind of before I put it on there, because remember I said, you know, by putting the Mod Podge mixture on it, it'll help protect it and stuff. So what I do is I find my little stick, and I don't want a big one, you know. I just want, it's a tiny, tiny accent. And so I'm just going to, yeah, just a little bit. It's not supposed to draw the eye. It's supposed to, you're supposed to see it when you look close, you know.
Exactly.
Right. So then I just dunk it in there, and then I'm going to place it right there. And the reason I'm touching something, if I just put it out here, it looks like it just, I don't know, if there's no trees around, nothing.
Yeah.
But if it's touching something, then the wind blew it there, and then something got caught and it couldn't blow it any further. I always like to, I really want to think about why it's there, that little stick, how'd it get there, somebody throw it, whatever the case may be. Building your little story around it helps you place that little tiny detail so well. I think you can't not do it that way. You know, I just think it really helps. If I want, I can.
It really will help, because I'm going to put a tree in the back of this thing, and then, you know, those twigs like that, you know, that will really
yeah.
The top.
Now what I'm doing is, remember, anytime there's wind blowing and there's an obstruction, it'll kind of gather around that obstruction. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to get some in there, and I put it in there. Now I'm going to go back, and you see all that water. I'm going to get that water. I'm going to wick that water away, and see it just bleeds it right out, and all you're left with is that nice dirt.
That's slick, Bill.
Yeah, it works real nice. And that's how you can control it. And remember, I did say, pardon me, I did put a little bit down before. And I think that's important, because I'm doing layers, and when we're doing our layers, it's important that if I put a bunch of stuff on at one time, that'll be a layer. If I put little bit, let it dry, little bit, let it dry, maybe change something a little bit, then I get almost like stratuses. I get really nice definable layers. I get a difference between the layers, and each of those layers is a different event. So that's why I like to think about it that way. I do have to let stuff dry. I do want stuff to set up before I go on. Okay, so I'm going to let those go for a little. We're going to come back to this, but now we're going to look at the inside of our window a little bit, because remember, we want to put some little rocks in there. So what I did, part of the preparation, is I did put some dirt in here, and I concentrated the dirt just on the bottom. There's a little bit going up the sides, but I'm not putting dirt up here on the sides, you know. I'm only putting it on the bottom because everything settles. So here, I'm going to take, where's my little rocks? Pardon me. And this is the same thing. This is where I can probably just use my Mod Podge and water mix. That's probably going to be fine. Or you could use the other, you know, just the thicker, the scenic glue. But I'm placing those in there. And one thing,
white glue or something.
Yeah, exactly. But this is a little bit, and I'm doing pretty much the smallest rocks. I'm thinking, you know, a small hand or a child going up. I mean, when I do this, I think of my mom is putting these rocks in this, you know, because she told me about that as a kid. So when I put that in there, I concentrate on 3. There's something about a grouping of 3. So you can have a single rock, you can have 2, but there is something about 3 that makes it just turns on something in your brain. So 3 makes it look like they've been put there. You know, you don't want too many. It kind of, you know, it's just a little, what is that? That's what it's supposed to be. And then for people that have heard the story, they're going to pick up on it, right? So just a few rocks. They're not spread out like they're just there. They're actually put in a little pile. And so that's just where I want to leave them. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put a little bit more Mod Podge on them to make sure that they stay exactly where I have them. Okay? Now, I think the last one, no, second to last one, we're going to do some of this. Now, this is a pretty arid area, obviously, and so we don't want a lot of this green, but there's green out there, and typically it's pretty small.
That's really smart, because you know what there is, people don't see it.
Yeah, but it's, and the closer you get, you know, you'll see it. So I'm just taking, see that? That's like half the size of a split pea. That is a very small piece. And it's got to be, you don't want it out, you want it tucked in somewhere. You know, you want it where...
In a crevice or
yeah. And it should be maybe in a shadow, possibly if water should gather somewhere. Having it on the top is not bad, but you see it's really tucked into something. And it's not going to be apparent. This is one of those details that you will not see stand in the way. It's when you get close. And part of my whole philosophy is you want to have different stages of reveal the closer you get to your model. You know, you don't want the illusion to break down. You want the illusion to support itself the closer you get. So some details I'm not putting in there so you can see them 5 feet away. I'm only putting them there for the person that really gets into it. And that's almost a reward, you know, for the person that really gets in there. I like to put something in my dioramas that 1% of people are going to see. But I want you to see, there's that little place where we had that little pile, and it looks just beautiful. I've got a little bit of dirt coming down from there. You can't see it fully yet because it hasn't dried fully, but it's going to look great too. So that does look good. Yeah, and I want to have that dirt pretty much all the way along this wood. You know, there would be no part of that doesn't have a little bit of dirt. More here, less there, you know, that's fine. But I want on every, you know, horizontal surface, I want to have that dirt. So I'm just going to continue I'm going to add a little bit more of this sanded grout to my mixture, a little bit more Mod Podge, and I'm just going to go through here and continue dabbing little areas and just getting, you know, that dirt on there. Now, when I'm doing this dabbing right here, it's getting dirt on everything. So this is definitely where we're going to come back with water and wash it away in some places.
Okay, yeah.
You know, so it doesn't have it just looks like that. Okay, so now
That's straight color. That's my problem. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, so now just water. I'm just using water, and slowly you'll see that the water is going to follow its natural path like water does, and it will gather everything on top of those stones next to the stones that the water is washing away, just like it would do naturally, and that's what we want. If we got too much water, we know what to do.
Yeah, that's fine. fine trick.
It just wicks it right away and it's gone.
That's slick, man.
Isn't that great?
Yeah,
so I just keep coming back with my water.
A big trick. It really is.
Just kind of, and I'm washing the top of the stones. The water is going where it will, and that's fine, even if it goes down the sides and streaks, because it'll streak just like water will. But you see how the tops of those rocks now are starting to appear, but there's going to be a nice sand in between each of them in the cracks where it would normally gather. And all that runoff, all that water runoff is going to go down the sides of this just as it would. So we get a real nice look. Now, I'll come back and we'll start wicking away some of this stuff. Like that's a good little pit there. It's got a lot of water in it, and we want the dirt but not the water. There we go. And when that dries, that'll look real nice because you'll still see your rock, but now, yeah, there'll be some nice dirt build up in this little corner down in those grooves right there. So you can see half the rock, but half of it's covered with dirt. And that's really what we want. We really want those, you know, kind of, it's not messed up. It's just kind of a, you know, it's just a nice way of getting that detail in there. Why'd this monitor go off?
It's so important in that, in this, especially in this part of the diorama where it's desert, you know,
right.
We're in a place where the wind blows all the time.
Right.
So.
It's knocking stuff down. It's throwing stuff up. You know, stuff's moving around all around this structure. And any of these little cracks, any of these little crevices, let's do this over here. I'm going to put, actually I'll do it on the front. I am going to put a little tuft of grass. I'm looking for my tweezers. I want to put a little tuft of grass on the front here, right in here, because this is a real deep little crack right there. That's one of the ones that I made real deep.
Yes.
And as long as it's in a perceived shadow, that's going to stay there, you know, and won't get blown out. So I think that.
Yeah, I got you. I mean, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, I not a lot. You know, on this whole thing, I might have 5 or 6 of those little tiny pieces of green, but I think that's important to get it that real nice look, you know, but always in a shadow. Always, you know, up here, the one I put up here, it's in a little crevice, so that's shaded, you know, certain times of day. I don't want to put one like right in the middle of that rock. You would have it in my neck of the woods, you know, but I don't think you'd have it in New Mexico or Texas. So I wouldn't put anything in the center of that rock. I put it right in the little notch right there, the corner, or the little tiny shadowy areas is the biggest issue. Okay. Well, I think that's pretty darn good. Now, it's going to need just some more of the same stuff. You know, we just did examples of how to do all these things, but I just need to do more everywhere. There's stuff on the front here like that. That's going to need a lot of dirt and stuff in it, but that'll get you there. I think that's what we're looking for.
Yes, sir. I do too, Bill. That really looks good.
Good deal. Well, I'm glad. Now, this next part is my students' progress as we've gone through the course. And this one board that we're looking at right now was like his practice board. And then later on, he started doing more. But I got to tell you, it's really gratifying to see how well somebody progresses. Because, you know, we met a couple of times a week. And sometimes we would skip because Bob would say, boy, I need a little bit more time. So we skipped a couple. But in that time, he was able to go back, watch the videos I created of our time together, and then, come back, and the next time I'd see him, it's like, wow, it's just leaps and bounds of where you were last time. So there's got to be practice in the coaching course. And so I'm kind of modifying things. Maybe we don't meet quite as often or something like that. But or we're just more flexible with time. But every time Bob came back, I was so happy to see his progress. And I was kind of waiting on these pictures to show up to really put this last video out, because I'm just so happy to see how things are coming. And I know, my student expressed to me, some of the difficulties he had in trying to do this before. And it mirrored kind of my own frustrations in trying to do some of this kind of thing many years ago. And it's really, really special to be able to see somebody, pick this stuff up and do so well with it. So these last few pictures you're going to see, this is coming along amazing. He's got the windows in, the wood is all weathered amazingly. We've got a lot of texture on this wall. He's got some paint on here in the last few pictures. I'm so proud. I mean, I don't want to say that in the wrong way, but I'm really excited that I was able to get something across and help with his creating, these wonderful pictures in this diorama he's creating.